Front Office Insights is presented by Sage, the official finance software partner of Major League Baseball.
Front Office Insights presented by Sage, Peoria, Arizona, where Red Lobster, Olive Garden, and all the other family dining options usually roll up and shut down by 7 p.m. That means work is done early in Peoria, and especially at Mariners camp coming after such a magical 2025 run. Their president of baseball operations, Jerry Dipoto, joins us on the stove to talk all things M's. Jerry, good morning. We could relive 2025 because it was such a great year for your club. Congratulations on that. But in terms of what you're doing right now, always evaluating, always looking around, I'll ask you this in a generic capacity, and you can choose to answer it from a Seattle standpoint if you wish. How many jobs are actually available to be won in a spring training camp?
Fewer than we've ever had before, at least during my years here with the Mariners. And, we have a pretty stable everyday club that we have a pretty good feel for. And if everybody's healthy, I don't imagine there's too much opportunity there. Like there always is, there's an opportunity for role players to step up and really impress in camp. And more likely, it's a couple of spots in our bullpen that are probably undecided, and we still have to determine what we're going to do there. But I would venture to guess on a 26-man roster, if everybody's healthy, we probably have 2, maybe 3 spots that are a little less certain than others, but pretty good idea of which way we're going to head if everybody's healthy.
Hey, Jerry, the misnomer for guys in your position, the president of baseball operations and everything else, you're on to the next thing you got to do. And most people think, well, they're struggling. You got right there to a World Series, and now Jerry's on putting the next team together. How long did the hurt stick with you? That was painful.
It's still there, really. I've equated it to like any time, back in my former life, you go out in the 9th inning, you give up a 3-run homer, and you lose the game. Somehow between the end of that game and the start of the next one, you have to figure out how to just put it in a box and put it up on a shelf and ignore the fact that it's there. But you never quite lose that edge, that feeling of we didn't get done what we wanted to get done. We've just had to wait a long time for the next game. And, we still have about a month to go before we get there, but it's up on a box, and, I'll open it when I'm in my 80s and I want to look back maybe more fondly on it.
Yeah,
I would imagine that your playing personnel, guys in uniform, feel a little bit differently coming into camp as kind of the team everybody's chasing. For you and your staff in the front office, for baseball ops, does that apply as well? Does camp feel differently now that you guys have established yourselves as the class of the division?
I do feel like it's different, and every group is a little bit different. There's a slight difference in personality, but like we talked about at the beginning, there's been so little turnover with our roster, just a couple of additions this past offseason that change a little bit of the vibe in camp. But for the most part, this is a group that comes in very confident. I think 2025, taught us what it takes to get to the front door. And, it's now 2026 is our chance to go break it down. And this group, I think they're leaning into that. They don't want to just go win a division. They want to get back to the place where we were before and go a step further. And, there's only one step further, and that's a pretty exciting thing for the Mariners.
And, Jerry, you put together an incredible roster like we've been talking about. But in your mind, when you sit there and you look at the team and having to get to that next step, what does it take? Does Cal have to hit 60 home runs? Does Julio have to go out and hit 400? But what does the team need to do collectively? How do you view it?
I'll take 59 and 399 if they want to pitch in and do that. But, Cal and Julio will be at the center of what we do. I think generally speaking, the guys just have to go out and do what they do, hit on what they do. We've got established players, major league stars up and down the lineup. I think we're deep. I like our platoon setups that we've put in place. And the biggest thing for us is, our starting pitching stays healthy. We are really built on our starting pitching and our depth, and I think that is the most critical thing for us. If our starting pitchers are healthy for 162 games, I like our chances of being a good team.
Jerry, three-way trades are so hard to pull off. And can you take us behind the scenes of the Brennan Donovan deal? Because to pull 3 teams off is amazing.
Yeah, it's only hard to do if Eric Neander and the Rays aren't involved. I think they're great at it, and it's something that as the offseason went along and we kept running into roadblocks in our desire to acquire Brennan Donovan. At one point, I just picked up the phone and I called Eric, and shortly thereafter, the Rays got involved, and I really think that the relationship between Eric and Chaim, the years that they spent together in Tampa before Chaim, obviously moved on and is now in St. Louis. That really helped. It's relationships are the only way you do multi-team deals, and in this particular case, I think the 3 of us were able to find common ground, and everybody got something that they feel good about.
From your standpoint, what was so coveting about Brendan Donovan? Why did you want him so bad?
Well, I think the biggest thing with Donnie is just his baseball IQ. The way he goes about playing the game is just pro all the way. It's high contact, elite bat to ball skills, his ability to move the game. And we felt like the missing ingredient for us was that on base percentage type presence at the top of our order, and Brennan brings that. He's been like a metronome of consistency in getting on base. And the other thing that really appealed to us with Donnie is his versatility defensively. In addition to aspiring to go win a World Series this year, we really like the upper levels of our farm system and feel great about some of the infielders who are beating down, on our roster. And Donnie's versatility allows us to introduce or implement those players when they're ready instead of forcing them in early or having to go to them late. He just gives us a professional presence who hits at the top of the lineup and does just about anything you need to win a game from a team perspective.
There's always a conversation around the Mariners schedule, Jerry, all the miles you guys log because you're stuck up there in the very corner of the map, the baseball map, and I've scanned through it. I don't know, it feels reasonable this year. When you get your schedule for each season, do you look for that kind of thing, like, okay, this is doable this year?
Yeah, it's always a challenge just how far it is from Seattle to roughly anywhere. And I think our guys, you just take it as once we get on a plane, who cares where we go? But, the rest period after is a little bit challenging. And, really look at the off days and the number of trips that we have to take to the east, because those are the more challenging recovery periods. And, it's this one does feel doable. And I think that's a good thing. I also think it's a real advantage when you have a team like ours who just, they hug it. We're from Seattle. This is who we are. And it's an advantage for us because other teams have to travel that far to get to our place. And in some way that gives us advantage as well.
Jerry, I'm really happy and excited for where you're at because you've had to go through so many different battles of being the guy leading the charge up there in Seattle. So I feel like you're finally settled in a spot where people might say, oh, they got a chance to make a run for a number of years now. Do you feel that way as well?
Somebody said that to me when we got down here, boy, you guys did a great job last year. I said, last year is really just the way you interpret the job that we've done organizationally. Building this roster, it started years ago. And, it's been at sometimes very non-linear in how it's developed. We've come up short a few times. We made it once before in 22. And, last year I thought was, the coming of age of a roster that we've envisioned for a number of years. And all these players, we talked about Cal and Julio, 80% of our starting rotation is homegrown and came up through our system. This has been our vision for a long time, and sometimes vision is blurry. And, for a number of years there, it got blurry. It got a little hairy. And, here in 2026, I love where our roster is, and it's players who've been here, who believe in what we do, who know what we're about. And I think the vibe, the culture in our space right now is as good as it's ever been, and that's exciting to me.
Speaking of blurry, do you ever look across the parking lot to the Padres camp and see A.J. Preller walking around and think, my God, he looks like Gene Wilder from Willy Wonka?
See, you wouldn't know that he looks like Gene Wilder because he has the bucket hat on. He's usually in a pair of like oversized Jordan hoop shorts and maybe a tank top. But AJ's, all his own, man. He's got his own personality. We see him routinely. We're going to do morning games with the Pods like we always do, and you'll see him over there in his golf cart scouting it like it's the combine. He's one of a kind. I think he's about the best in the business at player evaluation, in my opinion.
Oh, wow.
I love the fact that he does it his way.
It's so true, man. You see him in spring, he's got the bucket hat. It looks like Carl, the assistant groundskeeper from Caddyshack, man. In disguise, always. Hey, we appreciate the visit, Jerry. Good luck to you guys all year, and we really appreciate your time. Have fun at camp.